I started crying and I went back to the gym and I was so angry. And it took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to finish that session. I wasn't even taking breaks. I was just like pushing through it. And I was crying the whole session. And I was doing deadlifts with tears rolling down my eyes. And I was in physical pain and I was in emotional pain. I was so tired. And it was one of those moments where I was like, why am I putting myself through this?
Hi everyone. So today's episode is really about resilience. I mean, it's the kind that doesn't just show up in the moments of ease, but it forges in the fire of real struggle. And my guest today is a dear friend of mine, Cesalina Gracie, and she has an incredible story about perseverance. So from training for Everest, that's right, in just 6.5 weeks, she got the idea. I remember when she called me, and in 6.5 weeks, she was going to go, to overcoming moments of doubt, exhaustion, and even life-threatening conditions. She embodies what it means to really refuse to give up. We talk about the mindset required to face impossible challenges and how physical strength is only really part of the equation, and the unexpected lessons that she learned in really the most extreme environments. So whether you're an athlete or an entrepreneur like Cesalina is herself, or simply someone navigating life and really hard days, this conversation is a powerful reminder that we are all capable of so much more than we think. As we say, all is mental. Welcome to the Gabby Reece Show. Let's go. Cesalina Gracie, welcome to the house. This is how I have to see you. We have to book a podcast so we can visit.
Things are going to change this year. You're going to see me a lot more.
How long have we been friends now? Do you know how many years?
5, 6, maybe 7.
So we met randomly on an event, and you were pool training here, and I found out you lived nearby. 35, 40 minutes in LA is next door.
Yeah.
And so you would start to come on Saturdays, and because you're busy, and we would train together, and it's been really interesting to watch you go through this last, especially 2 years, because you teach self-defense and jiu-jitsu. Your last name is Gracie. People can put that together. You're a Gracie. It's woven into your DNA. And you've chosen the lane of girls and women because I think there is a lot of not only need, but then if men wanted it, there's a lot of opportunity for them. And then you'll hear girls talk about I don't feel comfortable sitting on a guy, or I don't want them sitting on me, especially girls if they're going through puberty. It's awkward. So you created this business that is very successful. And then you decided, I remember you called me and you go, and this is really the reason I wanted to have you on here again, is you go, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. And by then I'd already known you 3 or 4 years. And I thought, I didn't know Cess is a mountaineer. So take me on the journey. How did that fall in your lap, and why did you say yes?
Yes. Part of me saying yes was having you in my life in a very pivotal moment, which I really want to get into that story. That was the decision-making moment for me of whether I was going to bet on myself or not. And you're right, I have never done mountaineering before, and the reason why I decided to take on this opportunity is because it fell on my lap. I have a wide networking of friends who are athletes who ultimately, end up introducing me to people. And it was just one of these opportunities of hey, do you want to go to Nepal, trek to Everest Base Camp, and then climb this mountain called Le Boucher East, which is, high altitude, but it's a beginner mountain if you're interested in diving into this world. And what I think is really important about this story is whatever was happening on the outside with the planning for this trip was the opposite of how I saw myself taking on this challenge. Because while I was training for Le Boucher, while I was preparing everything for this trip from gear to learning the skills of mountaineering, internally, I was having such, a conflicting dialogue of Cesalina, I cannot believe you're going to be on Everest Base Camp and you're going to go for this lesser summit. This is not you. And I think so many times in life, when we decide to take on a challenge, to launch a business, to change careers, to study something else, to get out of a relationship that doesn't serve us, even though everyone thinks it's perfect, people don't understand. So the things that people are telling you that you're capable of doing, or the right step that you should take, or your first step in this journey should be this one. And internally, you know you're capable of more. You know that everything you've lived throughout your life actually prepared you to go for the higher summit, to go for the bigger mountain, and to go all in. So I was journaling for this trip, and everything I was writing about was, I can't believe I'm going to Mount Everest, and I had one fear about this whole trip was, if I attempt to climb Mount Everest, am I going to die? That was, the only part that I knew I had to be brutally honest with myself, because, it's a huge risk. It's the highest mountain in the world. So I talked to my coach, Mike McCassell, who was preparing me. I had 6.5 weeks only to train,
Take me there for a second, because
Yes.
Mike has since moved to Hawaii.
Yes.
But he was in Oregon. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So who connected you? How did you find him?
That's really important. I saw him, on podcasts, and I heard athletes talking about it. I saw Colin O'Brady on Joe Rogan talking about Mike McCassell and how pivotal he was for his success on all of his expeditions. From the rowing, crossing that he did, to crossing Antarctica, to all the world records that he broke, that his preparation with his coach is what, made him not only achieve success on his expeditions, but go back home safely. And something just clicked in me. I was like, I need to reach out to this guy. I need him to train me. And I just cold called him. I reached out to him and I said, look, I'm taking on this challenge. Would you take me on as a client? And he said, you don't have much time. You have 6.5 weeks. The training camp for mountaineers who have already climbed 8,000 meter mountains is at least 20 weeks. But if you want to do this, I'm on board and I'll do that with you. And I said, let's do it. And that was like 9 p.m. and I woke up at 7 a.m. with the program. And that's when the journey started, So we compiled 20 weeks of training in 6.5. So my training sessions lasted like 3.5 hours, 4 hours. It was brutal on my body,
And you're working.
I was working, I was hiring people, I was training instructors to replace me while I was gone. This was a 50-day expedition, so I was gone for almost 2 months, and I needed to make sure that what I had already committed in my life here would remain, regardless of my absence, and that my students would still get the best care and the best attention and the best training, while, I was gone. And I think it was important for them to see me take that on as well, because it felt like they went with me. But ultimately, the whole training camp that I did with Mike McCassell in the first 4 weeks were to climb Le Boucher. And then I decided to talk to him because he saw that I didn't sleep the previous 2 days, and I had to send him all my metrics every day, so he could track my recovery. We were always adjusting the training like on the minute. And he's like, what's going on? You're not sleeping. It's really important that you recover, so you can finish this camp. And I told him, I just can't sleep. I keep thinking, about this expedition, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you think if we attempted to climb Everest, do you think I'm going to die? And there was this silence. And then he looks at me and he says, Cess, I've been training for Mount Everest since day one. And at that moment, I got like tears in my eyes because I saw somebody that believed in me more than I believed in myself for a second, And he said, you're coming to Portland this weekend. I'm going to run your metrics, and then I'll be able to give you a professional, direct answer on whether you can take that on or not.
So what are the markers that, he wants to measure to see even if you're in the ballpark? Because it's one thing, to say I'm going to do a half marathon or a half try, you can always stop. You're thousands and thousands of miles away. You're in another country and you're doing something that is very dangerous. So, as much as I appreciate, a robust approach, you're taking into account some very different things. because of the real safety issues that you have to contend with. So when you went to Oregon, I have to ask first, because this is something sometimes I'm always laugh at myself about. So you come from the world of jiu-jitsu, you know, you're this sort of figure, you're very tall, it's, you know, all very official, everything looks like it's all together. But when we go for assessments as athletes, you have to show all your weaknesses. And I always laugh at myself about how I dread it every single time. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to be told what I'm not good at. It's all this stuff that I'm like, okay, especially like now my age, you know, and I'm like, are you still contending with that? And I need help with my knees. And I have my friend, Dr. Keith Pine, and he's been here quite often. So I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Can you help me? And he's just like, oh my God, this chick. So I was just curious, as somebody, it's just I know certain people who aren't like Laird, no problem. This isn't working, that doesn't work. You can't do this isn't good, work on this, no problem. Me, I don't want to hear it. It's like I'm dreading it. And so I was wondering, so you go to Oregon, are you nervous to get picked apart?
I'm nervous if I'm even going to make it, because his description of this camp, which was a high altitude training camp in a facility where I'm inside a room simulating high altitude. And his description was, my objective on this camp is to simulate what the worst day in the mountain could possibly look like. So then I'm like, excuse me, I thought you were there, you know, to prepare me, to make me feel good about myself, to boost my confidence, you know. So I would leave feeling like, oh, wow, I'm ready, I'm strong. So I actually went in thinking that I was going to get a boost of confidence. And then when he told me that, I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm there to be tested.
Well, the mountain doesn't care.
That's exactly what he said.
It's sort of like, see, I think about it parenting. I'd rather be the one to tell my kids sometimes some of the harsh truths because it still has love right behind it than them always getting slapped by life. And he actually was being more loving by saying, hey, it could get this bad. I just want to back it up a little bit. What were you doing to prepare? Because we live in Los Angeles, you're not that far above sea level. What were some of the things you added right away? I'm just curious that you put into your training before you even went to Oregon.
Yeah. So I had a good basic level of endurance and athleticism and strength, but compared to what I needed, I couldn't be further from what I needed, right? Because it's a completely different skill set. Long endurance, climbing for 23 hours compared to doing jiu-jitsu for 1 or 2 hours maximum on 5-minute rounds is completely different from what my body's used to. So when I started training here, it was a lot, interestingly enough, you know, walking backwards uphill with a lot of weight. It was a lot of injury prevention, meaning she needs to be able to descend the mountain safely because that's where over 90% of the deaths occur. So it was so enlightening to realize that every single piece of this training was planned to make me come back home. And I was going to succeed if everything else was in place, my mindset, if, you know, the conditions of the weather in the mountain would allow. There are a lot of things that are beyond our control, but making sure that my body wouldn't break down. And one thing that in retrospect, now I realize all the synergies between what I already teach and what was the pivotal, you know, training for the mountain. I remember one was I could not break my posture. And Mike kept saying that the minute you let your posture collapse, you are vulnerable.
As in your breathing, your lung shape, your activation of your muscles.
Your balance, right? Yeah. We're crossing these like tiny ladders that you can only fit 1 foot at a time. You can't even fit your feet side by side. You're, you know, holding on to ropes, they're loose. Those ladders, sometimes it's like 4 ladders just roped into each other, swinging side to side. You're climbing very steep, you know, blue ice, like icy mountains, and you need to be able to keep up your posture because the minute your posture collapses, your balance is compromised, your attention is gone, your breathing patterns shift, and that really puts you in a position where one misstep and you're gone. That's how serious it is. And I teach the same thing in self-defense, in, you know, dealing with daily lives, with daily interactions. It's like, your posture is everything. Your posture is going to affect every single interaction you have in life. Showing up with an open heart. You know, so many times we curl up in a way to protect our hearts, but that is doing the opposite work. First of all, nobody likes to be around somebody who's like always, it feels like you're hiding something or it feels like you're uncomfortable. There's so many different signals that we send out. And when you pull your heart forward, you're leading with your heart, that connects your head, your body, your mind. It puts you in place. Like, okay, this is the space that I inhabit on this earth. And I should be proud of the space that I occupy, and it's so hard to feel like this as a woman. You don't even realize the little things that happen, even just scrolling on social media and seeing someone that you think it's more beautiful than you, suddenly you don't even realize you're a little like, oh, and you start making yourself small. So it was so interesting that all the psychological aspects and the self-defense aspects that I teach about posture were actually going to determine, largely my outcome in the mountain in terms of your life will depend on your posture. So not only having, a strong internal posture, but also physiologically building on top of what I was already working on my whole life. So there were some beautiful and magical synergies between the world of jiu-jitsu and self-defense and what I encountered on Mount Everest.
I think what's interesting is when you talk about something all the time, a message, you can almost lose touch with it. Right, because it's so automatic. You say it, you can instill it on other people, all these things, but you yourself lose touch with it. And I find myself in that situation often. So here you are having this opportunity to actually relive, relearn, and re-express this very root part of your message for your students. I think it's so interesting when you're like, oh yeah, this is that thing I'm always talking about, and now I've got to do it. And I get to understand it in a new way, in a way that I haven't before.
Do you feel like as a coach, you not only teach high X to like hundreds of people, but you teach your friends here in your home gym? Do you feel that a big part of being a coach and the fulfillment that comes from it is almost like selfish because you get to constantly be reminded of those principles and those little details that matter so much, and then you're seeing on other people and you're reminding them, and in order to remind them you have to practice what you preach, so then you're always on that state.
Yeah, it's forced, standards, if you will. And the only thing that I want to always be careful of, though, is it's easy to take these things for granted. It's easy to not ponder them also philosophically, like what are the greater implications of this principle in my relationship with people, how I deal with conflict or when I'm afraid or whatever. So I think for me, sometimes with the teaching, it forces that I've got to try to keep the standard so I can vibrate it. I don't have to say it. But the other thing with me, though, is almost hearing it new each time for myself to be reminded too. I think that's a big thing. So you go, did you change your eating? Because it's safe to say, unless it's wild caught, you're kind of a pescatarian. Is that safe to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So unless, Hoyce has, killed it himself and brought it home, you are, and have, as long as I've known you, which I'm sure and many years prior to that, you're really diligent about your food, and it doesn't seem to be an obstacle for you. It just seems to be a person who's like, I eat real food, I don't eat that much, and I could do fish and veggies. Feels about right.
Yeah.
So did you have to change your eating? Did Mike say, okay, you got to put on, do you have to eat a different way, calories, different kinds of protein? Did any of that change prior to Oregon?
Absolutely, it changed a lot. So even before going to the high altitude training camp, day one, it was already like, okay, the full assessment, how many pull-ups can you do? 0. He's like, okay, we got some work to do in here. And then, what's your eating habit? What's your sleeping habit? Just literally like everything. I think he knows more about my life than like therapists, doctors, and everyone combined. And a big part of the shift was my diet. And I'm very transparent about it. I am open to experimenting and seeing what's best for me at that time for the lifestyle that I have at that moment. I've gone vegan. I've been vegetarian. Like you said, if my uncle hunts and brings, meat home and he cooks, I will eat it. I listen to my body on a day-to-day basis. And for Mount Everest, before I started training, I was only eating fish like twice a week. And I was pretty much, vegan for the rest of my diet because I don't eat dairy. And what we had to face was the fact that one, I had to put on as much weight as I could in 6.5 weeks, which means eating a lot of food because one, I'm getting a lot of energy output on these trainings. So just to replace the energy that I lost in like heavy, intense, long training daily with strength, endurance, I was burning a lot of calories. And on top of that, I had to put on weight. And I was able to put on weight. I was in the strongest, shape of my life. I put on, I think, 5 kilos before I went, just like, 10, 12 pounds. And I lost more than 20 pounds on that trip. So, there's no amount of weight that I could have put on that would have made up for, what I was about to endure. But I started taking creatine. I changed my supplements. I started eating red meat. Very particular about where I was getting it, but I was having, like 4 massive meals a day. I was taking protein shakes and I took a lot of supplements to Everest. I took Hydrate, I took Element, I took Thorn, multivitamin, because the difficult thing is you have to balance out the weight that you can carry and the effectiveness of that supplement, So I took beet powder. It was really important for me to give me energy and, strong multivitamin. I brought some frog fuel gels, which I ate like on the summit on top of Mount Everest, because at that point you can't even eat food anymore. So if you have a gel that doesn't freeze, you can just get a boost of energy.
Wait, what brand was it?
Frog fuel.
Was it okay? Tasting?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
It was good actually. And yeah, it was just eating more of everything. And then on the trek, I was very particular about not eating meat there. The most famous food there is the dal. It's like lentils. And I just didn't want to take any chances, because what a lot of people don't know is a big reason why people fail on their expedition is illness. Their immune system goes down, their body doesn't adapt, they get some kind of food poisoning, their body literally collapses. So I wanted to make it as easy as possible on my digestion. The food that we have to eat on altitude, unfortunately, is like carb loading because it's the easiest thing for your body to process. You want the easiest thing ever to turn into energy and to digest. So, for every part of this expedition, I had to make adjustments. And I think it's important for us to understand that whatever it is that you have in place, when you are going for something that is going to require a different side of you, you have to make certain compromises.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing because it's a different system. A different side of us sometimes is a different part of our system. And we have to either fuel that system or downregulate that system or train that system differently. And it's so interesting because when we look in the mirror and we brush our teeth, it's still us. The story that we've made attached to that face that we see in the mirror. But that's very interesting that you get the opportunity to really shift over into other various sides of your systems, yourself. So you couldn't do a pull-up?
I could not do a pull-up. My legs were the strongest part of my body, which was an advantage for climbing Everest, but
you have a light upper body and
I have a lighter upper body.
Strong booty and thighs.
Yeah.
Brazil,
yeah.
jiu-jitsu. So but you're very tall, which maybe isn't always in your advantage. So
definitely not for climbing Everest.
And not for pull-ups either, let me tell you. Your arms are long.
Yeah.
So how did you practice? Because nobody likes push-ups and pull-ups. I mean, unless you're, those military guys, you're like, you want to bang some out? I just look at that and go, I wish. How did you approach developing a skill set that in your mind, you probably thought, I should be able to do this, and for some reason I just haven't, or I don't. How do you approach breaking that down so that you can learn and start to improve?
I was just following Mike McCastle's advice, And so he has the world record on the most amount of pull-ups in the world.
And he's a large person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has a lot of world records. It's worth checking out, by the way. He has a project called the 12 Labors Project, which is doing, 12 insanely inhuman challenges. And he has a world record of ice submersion. He was, he broke Wim Hof's record. He was submerged in like 600 pounds of ice for like 2 hours and 40 minutes. He has done some like incredible things. And one of them was he had the world record on pull-ups, which he failed on the first time, went to the hospital, like almost died. And then he went back and he did that, I think, with a 30 or 40 pound vest. So I was like, I think he knows what he's doing, I'll just follow it. And a lot of it was getting strong in the negatives. So I would put a bench, that's like how I started. I would put a bench, I would jump up and then go down counting in 5 seconds. And he only allowed me to do negatives. He told me, do not try to do a pull-up. Just keep working on the negatives. I got stronger and stronger on the push-ups. I was doing push-ups, with 30 pounds on my back, which I was pretty impressed compared to like my upper body strength at first, And it's interesting because it's like brick by brick, right? Like getting stronger is a game of inches. I wish people knew that, because you can set the highest goal for yourself and just understand it's the inch by inch every day, every session matters. 30 minutes on the bike matters. There was an episode, I had a really rough day at work. I was just like, I didn't sleep well. My body was completely broken down. It was the 6th day of training on that week. So, just back-to-back training. And it was 10:40 p.m. I went down to the gym and I started the strength session, which lasted 3 hours. And on the first 10 minutes, I was just mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted. I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And I just texted, I actually went back home, and 20 minutes later, like Mike could see the future. He just texted me. He was like, hey, what happened with today's session? Because the day was almost over. And I told him I just can't do it today. And what he said is very similar to what you just said. It's like, hey, the mountain is not going to have mercy on you, and they don't care how you feel. So I started crying, and I went back to the gym, and I was so angry. And it took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to finish that session. I wasn't even taking breaks. I was just like pushing through it. And I was crying the whole session. And I was doing deadlifts with tears rolling down my eyes. And I was in physical pain, and I was in emotional pain. I was so tired. And, it was one of those moments where I was like, why am I putting myself through this? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important reminder as well. It's not every day that we feel great about the undertaking that we're going. I'm sure having a podcast, some days you're super excited and some days you're like, oh my gosh. Launching a company, some days you're like, wow, we had the best month ever. And then you're going to have a product that you're going to launch and nobody cares about. And you're like, wow, I spent 2 years developing this. It doesn't matter what it is. You can be writing a book and some days you're like, wow, this book is going to be amazing. And there's another day you're like, what am I doing? This is terrible. Nobody's going to want to read it. I don't want to read it. So we have really bad days, and every single person that succeeded has gotten like this close to quitting. They really have. They quit in their minds a million times, but they change that internal talk. You know how to flip that switch. It's not that you never go into the negative, you never go into the really dark corners of your being, but you know how to pull yourself out of it, And I feel like that day with my strength session, after hearing what Mike McCaskill told me, was one of those opportunities to know, oh, I know how to pull myself out of this dark place. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, I literally had to use that skill on the mountain, so it was a really important lesson to learn.
Well, it's a gift. And the interesting thing about physical discomfort is, in one way, it's harder because it's physical, but in another way, it's easier in that there's a straightforwardness to finish the workout. Versus sometimes we have these other endeavors, you're an entrepreneur in life that we're taking on, that they're not quite as defined. And it's like, okay, no, this workout is this many reps and this long and this much weight. Okay, it's straightforward. Sometimes so in one way it's harder because it's physical, but in the other way, it is easier. And that's what I've always really appreciated about it. Versus in life, sometimes there's an unknowingness to when will this improve, or will it improve? Is there politics involved? And it's easier physically because you can go through all this sitting on the couch or at your desk. So I always thought it was interesting to get to know yourself through these physical endeavors because there's something so immediate about it.
The interesting thing is that we can use our bodies to realize what we are capable of mentally in life. And once we start unlocking that connection, we actually start embracing the good and the bad days. Because when you go through something extremely difficult and taxing physically, you realize that your body was just a vessel to get you through it. And what actually got to the other side of it was your mind. And then you realize, oh, wow, I'm capable of more than I thought. Oh, I'm capable of doing hard things. And if you slowly do hard things, they start becoming the easy things. And then what's hard for you, it's always your threshold starts increasing. So then the email that is going to upset you, suddenly now you notice your shift in breathing, you notice that your heart started racing a little bit, and you develop that ability to self-regulate because you're so used to the physiological sensations in your body of pushing, of sprinting, of getting to a place where your body's like grasping for air. Because your response when you are stressed out, when you're dealing with your sickness in the family, a breakup, a company loss, whatever it is that's happening, your body's going to respond to that stress. So whether it's physical stress through training, whether it's mental stress, our body's one thing, and for as much as we love to take it all apart and go, do this for your sleep, do this for your body, do this for your mind, ultimately, when you engage in difficult, physically taxing things, you are strengthening everything else. And, there was one situation where we were going from base camp to camp 1. I'm finally there, and it was now for the summit push. Because when we climb Mount Everest, you climb the mountain almost twice, because there's cycles of adaptation. So a lot of people have 2 cycles of adaptation. Some people have 3. I did 1 only. So my second, cycle was already the summit push. And things change. You know that everything is in line right now. And when I was going from base camp to camp 1, you're going through the Kumbu Icefall, which is just this like massive glacier of like moving blocks of ice that are as big as a building, and then crevasses that are as deep as like hundreds of meters that you can't even see what's below you. So it's like whatever is above you could kill you, and whatever is below you is too deep to recover as well. So it's like there is no safety net for you in that moment. It's just step by step breathing. And at the same time, it's mesmerizing. Like I miss it. I was like, this feels like a grown-up playground. You're just like hopping through these things and you're going through this. You're looking around and it doesn't feel real. And I understand why people go back. Because you cannot replicate that feeling, and it's almost like a pinch me moment where now we're here, I'm having this yummy coffee and talking to you, and it's like, did that really happen? And even the bad you miss. And it's weird to say that, but you do, the feeling that I had when, I heard, and you're sleeping with avalanches happening all the time around you. You're in the Kumbu Valley. It's like surrounded by mountains and there's rock falling and avalanches everywhere. And you don't know how close it is to you or not. But when you're in it and you hear a rock fall or something right next to you, there's nowhere to run. Like there's no quick way out. So you just have to be able to make decisions under stress in a way that somehow will allow you to keep moving forward. Because panicking is not an option, So I hear the sound and I'm like, I stop. And my Sherpa keeps walking. And I said, there's an avalanche coming. And we look up and it's just like this massive mountain coming down. And I didn't know what to do. That was my first avalanche. And he turns back, he yells at me, he said, cover your face and go down. And I was like, oh yeah, because I can't suffocate. So I cover my face and go down. You have no idea how big, how small, what's going to happen, if you're going to die, if you're not. So literally in a split of a second, you see your whole life passing by you. And you're like, you can't even make sense of things, but you have the most positive thoughts and the most intrusive and negative thoughts. And it's like, why am I here? Why did I choose to do this? This is crazy, but it's so peaceful because there's nothing around. And if this is the way I go, then, you know, I think it's the best way to go then, because at least it's what I chose to do, you know? And eventually when the avalanche is gone, I am very shook, you know, and I cannot feel my legs. I cannot stand up, and I'm trying to stand up and I have no strength in my body. And I'm like, oh my God, like, how am I going to keep going from here? You know, but the reality is those are the moments that everything you did built you to face. And ultimately it's all in your mind. It's what you think you're capable of doing. Are you able to pick yourself back up and go back into the mission? Is something strong enough in you that will keep pulling you forward? Are you someone that is able to, when you stand up, understand that this might happen again, but that there's no, like, the choice that you made is yours? Because you know what must be the worst thing ever is to be in a situation where, whether it's an avalanche, it can be anything else, but you're like, I never even wanted to be here, you know? And that's why those little things that we do in life ultimately build you up into a successful woman, man, like whatever it is, because ultimately you are owning up to every decision that you make in life. It's never no one's fault. It's always ultimately you. And I always tell that to my students, you know, people will treat you how you allow them to treat you. Whether you have the tools to stand up for yourself or not, you can go and learn and acquire those tools. It's not easy. But once we start taking ultimate ownership of everything that happens in our lives, we experience true freedom, you know, and then you can choose, how do I want to show up? How do I want to keep moving forward from here? How do I want to, you know, proceed? How do I want to live my life? And at least the price you pay or the hardships you go through and the successes you experience, they are aligned with your truths, you know?
Yeah, I always think if you're suffering at something that reflects it's okay. Those are the easy ones. I mean, they're never easy, but they're easier because you're like, yes, this is a reflection of my life, not why am I in this? You know, either with this person or in this situation that, you know, you allowed the train to run away. You know, like you had an instinct about a person, but you didn't listen to it. And then you fast forward a year and you're in some weird situation with them. And you're like, I knew it and now I'm here. Or whatever the things that we abandon, the cues that we get. Before we get to the top, spoiler alert, when you went to Oregon and you did the assessment, how far off were you? You have a very short period of time to prepare. What were his main chunks? Like, hey, because I'm sure at that point, and because he is so skilled at getting people ready, he's not going to give you a million things. So what did he want you to stay focused on getting ready before your trip?
Yeah, so the camp were 3 days of 10-hour consecutive training a day. I've never done that. I never worked out for 10 hours uninterrupted with literally like 60 seconds on the clock to chug a box of blueberries, you know? So the camp was to simulate what my climbing experience would be. So these are the stimulus that you need to deal with. This is the amount of stress. And now in retrospect, I realized that he really wanted to induce as much stress as possible and see how I responded. At the time, I thought the camp was going to test my physical abilities and how the previous 4 weeks of preparation had been. Now I realize it was all about answering the question that I asked him, that if I attempted to climb Everest, would I die? Because what would make it or break it on that trip would be my ability to respond under stress. Mm-hmm. And even though you're under physical exhaustion and depletion, ultimately it's like you need to learn how to refuel very efficiently. You need to know how to pick yourself back up. And I'm going to push you to the point where you literally think you cannot keep going. And every time you hit those walls, I'm going to walk past these walls with you. And I'm here for that. And I'm here to tell you that you are ready for it and you are able to get past those walls. And let me tell you, some of those walls were, you know, on the hour 9 of training where I'm on the Stairmaster with 30 pounds on my back and a band around my waist with him like pulling me back the whole time to simulate whatever kind of storm I would be in. And my legs shaking and me literally telling him, I am going to fall down. I'm going to fall. My legs can't keep going. You know, I'm dehydrated. I'm tired. And he's like, okay, if you fall, I'll catch you. Keep going. And he just wanted me to see that your body doesn't give out on you if your mind believes that you can keep going. But if you give up on your mind, your body, it will break down on minute 2. And that's really what I learned on that camp. It was like, oh wow, my body will not give up on me as long as my mind is sharp. So, you know, the camp consisted of, you know, high intense cardio with long endurance, heavy, you know, cardio, weighted cardio with strength session, with nonstop circuit training in between. So it was like an hour and a half in this cardio machine and then an hour circuit, then 2 hours on the Stairmaster with like 30 pounds waist, then like an hour and 45 backwards walk on this treadmill, maximal incline. Now let's do, and then sometimes you would save the balance for last. So then now there's a balance circuit. You're exhausted, but this is, you just got to the Hillary step.
Stepping down.
Yeah, are you gonna die? You know, that's how your legs are gonna feel when you get there. And this is when your balance is going to be challenged. So are you able to keep going? And now I'm increasing the altitude, you know, in the room. And did you get a headache yet? How is your body responding well to altitude? You know, what are your oxygen levels? And it was just like nonstop. And now you're gonna do plank on ice with your, you know, hands submerged. And now you're gonna do wall sits. And here is a Lego that you have to put together while your feet are on ice. And here are the ropes. I want to see you tie all the knots that I said that you should learn, you know? So now you're like, wow, this is day 3. I'm exhausted. My feet are on ice. My legs are shaking. I'm in a wall sit. I just finished doing a Lego. My whole body is like exhausted. And now my hands are frozen from the plank on ice. And you just handed me 8 ropes and I have to make all those knots. So it's like, are you able to focus? Are you able to perform? Can you do mental tasks under complete exhaustion and depletion? And ultimately, when you get to the actual environment, you realize that that has already been experienced somehow. He's a genius. Mm-hmm. He truly is. And that's why I left the camp with a lot of confidence that I was able to do it. And on top of that, you know, he was like, he read my VO2 max. He saw how my body adjusted. I had a massive drop on my oxygen when we went into the camp. Mm-hmm. The first hour and a half, my oxygen levels dropped a lot. And then suddenly they recovered in a way where I was like 93%, you know, the whole time, while the videographers in the room and the team were constantly leaving. They're like, I am dizzy, you know? So adapted. I adapted well to altitude. My VO2 max was, you know, excellent. He said was higher than some of his athletes that broke world records in climbs. And I think he saw that mentally I would be, you know, I would be ready.
It's interesting. I can't help but think that what you went through that 3 days physically was more brutal in a specific way versus in real time. And I saw you when you came back. So I know how tough it was on you because of also the duration of how long you were gone. But that the difference is when you're really doing it, you're not going to die in Oregon with him. So it's an interesting combination of being pushed physically in certain ways more when you were in the training, but then having that duration, the unknown, and the danger, the threat component. It's just an interesting, and what a gift that you. So let's take one of the lessons out of there. Training a little all the time is a bigger foundation for people's health and abilities to try new and different things more than they realize. The importance of emotional. I always say from pool training, I know who I would go to war with because I see who freaks out or who doesn't, and you can see it in 6 minutes. I know right away. There's certain people, I don't care how big and strong they are. There's no way, and then I'll see. You know, nice little lady who's in a predicament, and you see her sussing it out and thinking, what would be the best decision? This is her knots, right? Or, you know.
Yeah.
And in the moment. And so I think people equate so much as physical, but you said it, all is mental and that awareness. So,
one thing I thought a lot in my camp, because I had been training with you for like 3-4 years maybe prior to this camp in the pool.
us and Kenny Bowl wrestling.
Yeah. And one of the biggest heartbreaks I had was when Mike said, I cannot fit in the pool training in your camp right now, like in these 6.5 weeks, But when I was in the high altitude training camp, one thing that I used so much is what you taught me in the pool and you constantly remind me of. When you're going down, relax your face. There's a moment to, and when you jump up, go for it. So that balance of you need to find relaxation in the stress.
Yeah.
Even though you're in an environment literally with no oxygen where you cannot breathe because you're in the bottom of a pool, you need to find relaxation in there. And then in order to get the air that you so desperately need, you're going to have to make an effort.
You gotta go.
So how can you find relaxation and push? How can you go through this whole journey before you can even take a breath? And I use that a lot in the mountain. And I know that when I was caught in an avalanche, there was one moment that I am terrified of heights, by the way. I think it's important that I share this because people think like, oh yeah, she's not scared. Every single person that does, dangerous things is afraid. Mm-hmm. If you're not afraid, you wouldn't even be there. Like it's,
You'd be done.
Yeah. I am terrified of heights. And those were the moments where I was like, ooh, because if I'm tense, I'm wasting energy that I do not have the luxury to waste in this environment. And you were in my mind so much in the most critical parts of this climb where I was like, I felt the tension and I was like, and I remember the sound you make in the pool. You're like, hey, and I was like, oh, and I would immediately like just relax my face and then gear up and then, okay, take a breath. And, we never know the skills that we are acquiring and how they're going to help us in life. Yeah. But I think, to summarize this conversation that we had about my training camp, about my training in the pool with you, about jiu-jitsu, and how did all these things serve me in, attempting to climb the highest mountain in the world and putting myself in the most hostile environment possible on the planet, arguably is your skills are transferable. They really are. So just keep going. Just keep acquiring skills. Stay curious. Keep learning. Meet new people. When you invited me to come to pool training, I remember I even told you, I was like, don't invite me to be polite because I'm going to show up. It's like, I'm going to be there. So just when the opportunity comes into your life to try something new, just, go for it. I think procrastination is what kills dreams. Just understand your skills will be transferred. You're going to use them in ways that you can't even imagine yet. And it will probably be in the moments where you need it the most. That was a big lesson for me.
So you're there. It's the day. It's go time. And you sort of have to, I don't want to say acquire an additional Sherpa, but you went and advocated for yourself. And there was a gentleman who maybe had already gone up, ascended, and he descended, and you said, hey, I need you to take me up. Is this right? Am I saying this right?
Yeah, that is a story about faith. And, whenever your life is in someone's hands, we think that we don't have the right to speak up if something feels wrong to us, and it doesn't matter what circumstance you're in, you need to honor that inner voice. Because that is literally the difference between having a positive or negative outcome. And if the negative outcome means either you put everything in line and you're not getting what you worked so hard for, or costing your life, to the most extreme point, it doesn't matter. You need to honor your gut. And if something feels off, it is. Listen to that and act on it. Develop the ability for it. So when I was at Camp 2, I was assigned the Sherpa who was going to go for the summit push with me.
Yeah, and but let's set the table a little. You're weeks and weeks in, right? I mean, by now you're probably pretty tired. You're isolated, meaning you're away from your friends and family, so you're by yourself.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the beginning of the trip. This was towards the end. So I think that's important because a lot of times when we are tired or we're not quite in our usual environment, sometimes it's like I always joke about when I see people on holiday. I go, yeah, they think the laws don't apply to them the way they're driving and moving. I'm like, did they leave their brain at home too? You know,
especially in Hawaii, right?
Well, just anywhere. You're just like, gravity's still existing, you know, like, so here you are deep into this journey and you have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah. The moments where we are the most vulnerable are the moments that's the hardest to advocate for ourselves, right? Especially if you are under someone's leadership, you know, so then you're in that internal battle of, you know, do I honor what I'm feeling inside? Do I completely outsource, you know, the decisions of my life to someone else who technically holds the power in this position? And I was, you know, at that situation, I was assigned a Sherpa at the time who had never climbed Everest. And I just looked at that kid. He was young, in his early 20s, looked like a kid and, you know, beautiful heart. But I was like, we can't both be climbing Everest for the first time. This is not right. And I just knew we weren't going to make it. And I just looked at him and I was like, this guy's going to break down before I do, you know? But, you know, where do you find somebody else? So like I want to share a story about faith. I was on the tent eating at Camp 2, having dinner, ordered to leave the next day at 6 a.m. And everything in my body is just screaming, you know, like, I do not feel safe. I do not trust my life with this person. I do not trust this person at all to take care of, you know, his own life because we are both discovering something that is not really the best place to be discovering. And, you know, I am sitting on the tent feeling completely unsafe and just knowing like I have to do something. I just don't know what it is. And I had tried. I expressed my needs. I said, you know, I do not want to climb with this person. This is not the deal, by the way. You know, when you were in my group, in my contract, it stated specifically one of the 3 people that were supposed to have climbed with me. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, you know, this Sherpa wasn't any of them. So I'm sitting on the tent thinking, okay, what's going to be my next move, you know? And I just put my hands together and I start praying. And I'm like, God, I've put everything in line to be here. Like, only we know the things we go through to get to where we are. Like, nobody truly know, you know, those dark moments that you have to get over. And I'm praying, just asking for a sign. What can I do? Please, you know, give me any sign that I should advocate and fight for myself. And I'm in tears praying, like so nervous. And I open my eyes because 2 people walk into the tent. And when I look at that second, it's a Sherpa who holds, you know, world records from the fastest ascents on Mount Everest. And coincidentally, somebody who became one of my best friends on Everest Base Camp. And when he walks in, I get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps now. I get goosebumps all over my body. And I'm like, this is my sign. And now I'm going till the end. So when we open ourselves completely to listen to the universe, God, your own guides, your mind, your destiny, whatever you believe in. But if you truly open and you commit to saying, when you get that message, you're going to act on it, the message comes. You can talk to a lot of people, and if we are honest with ourselves, we know we heard it loud and clear. You might choose not to do it, you might get scared, but the message is there. And developing the ability to then go for it takes a lot of courage. And that's what happened with me. When I saw him walk in, I was like, he's going to climb with me. And he was actually coming back from the summit with another client. You know, and that was a moment that I advocated for myself. But before I did that, he sat down in front of me on the table. He started eating, you know, he had just come from a summit push.
He didn't know he was going back up.
He did not know, you know, and I have never watched so attentively somebody take every single bite from their meal. I was like, I cannot wait for him to be done because I need to talk to him.
I have to pounce on this guy.
Yeah, I need to talk to him. But I think it will be a better conversation if his stomach is full. And when he finishes eating, I think he clearly saw that I was disturbed. Yeah. And we did develop like a sisterhood and a brotherhood, you know. We would stay in the Everest base camp. I learned how to sing in Nepalese, you know, and I would sing with them. And I fell in love with the culture and we were very playful. So when he finished eating, I asked him to walk outside with me. And I actually said, I need to ask you something. And just answer to me if I was your sister. This is a situation. This is the Sherpa I was assigned to. And I immediately see his face change when I say the name. I said, I do not feel safe, but I trust you. Do you think I will be okay if I climb with him? And then he takes a long pause. I think he was just taking into consideration everything.
The politics of the Sherpa union.
Yeah.
And
but he saw my dedication because when we were at, base camp, there's a tent where everyone is hanging out, waiting sometimes for days, I would be in my tent, putting my crampons on and taking it off. Yeah, learning the tools, right? Like literally like adjusting, changing the size, like flipping it, putting it on, putting my gear, taking it off, tying the knots, taking it off. Just learning everything about it. And this was all guidance from Mike McCassell. He said, Cess, you do not take a minute break. Like when you're there, I want you to be able to put on your gear with your eyes closed. And I would be doing that with my eyes closed and laughing, thinking, if somebody saw me right now, they would just think I'm crazy. But I'm like, what if you get snow blindness? That was a conversation in our camp. I want you to be able to still put on your gear. If anything happens with you, of course, you're going to have support, but your Sherpa can be taken down by an avalanche and you might survive. You need to be able to bring yourself back to safety, no matter the circumstance. You need to be as, self-sufficient in the mountain as possible. And we should be like this with our lives constantly. If you're always outsourcing your safety, if you're always outsourcing your success, if you're always complaining like, oh, they didn't want to do that for me, you are the only one that can do things for yourself. People might help. People will probably jump on board when they see that you're already doing it. But sitting and waiting for someone to come and solve your problem is not going to happen. It's not going to happen here in Malibu. It's not going to happen on Mount Everest. You need to be able to take the steps in order to provide for your own safety, your own independence, your own freedom. And that's what I was doing. So I think he saw my dedication. He saw like, this girl, she's 100% in. She's in. If I was with them, I was like, I'm not drinking alcohol. I'm not partying. I'm like asking them, hey, put the lyrics of this song here. And what do you guys do? Let me read your book. And just like, at least the whole time that I'm there, I'm learning, and if there's anything that I can give in return for them, then I'm looking for opportunities to return that, So to finish the story, he looks at me and he says, if they allow me to climb with you, you can tell them that you have my word and I will go back up. And that's all I needed to hear. And yes, it was a war. It was a war.
Why was there bureaucracy even within that?
Yeah, there was bureaucracy. There was a lot of politics, and God knows what else was there. A lot of people, mountaineering is a highly male-dominant space. Yeah. And a heartbreaking thing about it is a lot of times they do not want women to succeed. And if you look at most, male-dominated spaces, that's the truth. Because if they wanted women to succeed, they would be more inviting. It would be a more welcoming space, and you would have more women there.
Well, look what's happened since you climbed. That one woman crushed every record, right?
Yeah.
Where's she from? Not the Netherlands.
Norway.
Where's she from? Yeah.
Yeah, but go ask her what she went through. It was a lot. So the support that she got, I think it was very different from what other people who broke records got.
Sure. But it's just interesting where she's done every summit and killed the records. Right?
Actually, women do better in high altitude. That is a well-known thing. We respond and adapt better to high altitude.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
do you think you would have, on the day of when you woke up, said, I'm not going to go, if you didn't have the right guide? Or do you think you would have rolled the dice? Where do you think you were at?
I don't know. I didn't even go there. I haven't found that answer yet. I haven't made that decision. And the beautiful thing about taking that time to ask for guidance, because I did not have an answer, was that when the answer came, now I could act on it, because I did not know what to do. And I think there's a lot of moments in life where we are actually lost. You know, ultimately I would have to make a decision, you know, because you just have to. And I'm glad that when I made a decision, it was coming from a place of certainty. And, you know, it was harder than if I had chosen to just go with what was already decided for me, you know? So I think it's important for us to understand that a lot of times people will try to dictate your future.
Well, let's put a frame around that, though. It was harder in the short term. And that's the really important thing here. Because the first thing I thought of is like, oh, this poor young Sherpa, Seth probably didn't want to hurt his feelings. You know, it's like people have all this stuff. Like, imagine you're, you know, how far up a mountain, and in there you're sort of like, yeah, I don't want to. And the consequence is life and death, but still we're going to think about other people's feelings, right? So in the short term, it's more of an inconvenience because it's a change. And people are going to discuss, and well, you know, he's gone up the day before and now he's stepping on the kid's head and all the million things. But in the long run, when you're up and back safely, there's no comparison.
And you know, the beautiful thing is when we lead with truth, we tend to not hurt people's feelings. If you have the courage to look at people in the eye and tell them how you feel, 99% of the time they understand. And if they don't, it's because maybe they're not in that moment with themselves yet. But I promise you, at some point, they're going to look back and they're going to go, oh, I know what she means. Maybe it will take them being in your shoes at some point. And what I did was I went to that Sherpa and I sat down with him. And I said, look, this is the first time I'm climbing Mount Everest. I put everything in line to be here. I cannot take any chances. I appreciate you willing to also put your life in line to accompany me on this challenge. But I will be climbing with Lakpa. Please do not take it personal. Please do not let this hurt your confidence one bit. And I think that the fact that I'm telling you this now will allow you to have the opportunity to be reassigned to another client that might have more structure to take you with them. And look at how crazy this story. Literally, I leave the next day, and when I'm coming down from my expedition, he's going up with another client that had 3 other Sherpas with her. She climbed with 4 Sherpas, which I've never seen before. And he got a much bigger tip than he would have gotten if he climbed with me.
Yeah.
And a much bigger structure.
He had support. He had
support. He carried way less load. And, you know, now that I went through this experience, and, you know, I'm yet to meet someone who says, I listened to the voice in my heart and I regretted it. I haven't seen that happen yet. And the more the expedition went on, the more I realized I made the right choice. Because it was me and Lakpa, and the calls that he made, which I knew, I was like, I need to be with somebody who has experience. Yeah. Because it's one thing if I have climbed Everest 13 times, let's go. But if this is my first time, you always need somebody to have more experience than you do, or vice versa. Yeah. You need to even that out when you're working as a team. You cannot have a team of completely unexperienced people. Somebody there needs to have more experience, because that ultimately leads to a successful mission. Yeah. So, you know, when I was climbing with Lakpa, he made certain calls that one saved my life and one allowed us to have summit success. I'll tell you 2 of these things real quickly. One, when we were climbing from Camp 3 to Camp 4, we passed this other mountain called Lhotse, which then you have Camp 4 of Lhotse. He stopped there and he said, you know what? I'm going to get 1 extra oxygen tank from a client that was supposed to climb Lhotse and didn't, because there's a storm coming and we might get stuck on Camp 4. And if we don't have enough oxygen, we're going to have to descend. And, you know, I now see what he said, because at the time, what I'm translating his actions, but he didn't verbalize that to me. He just said 1 minute, he went inside the camp and he came out with one extra bottle of oxygen, so I think I was carrying 2 and he was carrying like 4 or 5, 4. So when we get to Camp 4, that's already death zone. Whether you're wearing oxygen or not, your cells are dying. There's not enough oxygen to sustain life. We, get there, you rest a few hours and you're supposed to go for the summit push on that day. Everyone started leaving. He said, let's wait. We're going to leave later so we don't get stuck in lines.
Behind people.
Yeah. And by that time, he already knew me. He saw my speed climbing. So he knew he could make decisions with me that would be strategic for what the two of us could accomplish, And when we waited like almost 2 hours and there was a massive storm. It was almost like ripping out the tents. There was like snow coming through the tent. And he's like, this is not a good summit day. We might have to turn around. So by the time we decided if we were going to go or not, people were returning already.
So they also wasted that energy.
They wasted that energy, and some people had to descend because then they didn't have enough oxygen to stay. So then we had to spend a night and a whole day the next day. So that's the thing. When you make that call, it means you're staying an extra 24 hours in the death zone. And your time there should be very limited. And his experience, at night, he was sleeping without oxygen, and then he would put on oxygen for like 20 minutes and he would take it off. So he was saving oxygen. I was using my oxygen in the minimum, 0.5. We were just like, we're just gonna chill here, feel, and get ready for, a better summit window. Nobody summited, and the few people who summited that day, one came out with frostbite, it's a very thin line, but the people in our expedition all returned without a summit. So then the next day, same thing, everyone leaves at 9 p.m. and we wait. We start organizing our gear, putting on the boots, and putting on socks takes like 10 minutes and like a lot of short breaths, So we decide to leave an hour and 40 minutes after everyone. We leave at 10:40 p.m. And I don't know how, I'm always blessed, with the best conditions. We didn't get stuck in any lines, like his strategy was spot on. But I went through an experience with him, and there were so many lessons on this trip that, the more I talk to you, the more I process it, the more I remember. And I was like, oh yeah. When we were climbing, it's so beautiful. You start climbing at night and it's pitch black. There's no light pollution. All you see is like the little headlamps, which if you don't want to see a huge precipice next to you, just like keep looking forward. There were some moments I would be like, whoa, my goodness, I'm so scared of heights, but breathe, keep going, you'll be okay. And then you're seeing like all these little lights, and they're so encouraging because these are actually people, but they look like stars.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, these people are rock stars, but it's like those little stars, it's almost like the sky is moving and there's a story painting, and maybe you have already a little bit of hypoxia, so you're like a little like hallucinating. And then as we keep going, we are hit by a heavy windstorm, over 100-mile winds. After that storm, we get up to continue climbing, and I look at those little dots, and one of the dots starts coming closer to us, descending, And in my mind, I'm just like trying to understand what's happening. And I'm like, it's too early. Like, there's no way this climber summited. Is there a blockage? Is there like a rope that has been cut? Is there like, am I not going to make it? Are they hurt? Like, is that a rescue? Like, every story comes to your mind because you don't know why this climber is coming back down. And as we were approaching it, it was a climber from my expedition. Mm. And it was actually one of the most experienced climbers. It was a woman that had been climbing for 25 years. Now listen to the story. She had been to Everest Base Camp 20 times. She prepared her whole life for Everest. It was like her childhood dream, right? Like, all she thought about was like, if one day, and I crossed her and I immediately went to check, like, is she okay? Is she hurt? What happened? And she's totally fine. So we're like, my Sherpa's talking to her Sherpa, and she didn't want to keep moving forward. She got to like 300 meters from the summit at that point. It was like the beginning of dawn. It was the coldest time of the day. And it is the hardest part. It's the coldest part. It's the most dangerous. You're the most exhausted, but also you know what you signed up for, right? So we try to convince her to go with us. Let's go, as a group. And she looks at us and she says 3 things I'll never forget. She says, it's too cold. It's too dangerous. It's not worth it. And at that moment, I looked at her and I was like, this is self-sabotage embodied in a person. Like, I'm actually looking at self-sabotage, which so many women engage in without even realizing. And she doesn't realize it. And I got emotional because I was looking at her, looking at like a tangible self-sabotage situation where you can almost touch it. And I knew in my heart, with everything in my being, that if I had met this woman a few months before and I had an opportunity to take her through my program, to share the principles that I learned with my family, which is what got me there, she would have made it. But at that point, it was so deep in her mind that there was nothing we could do, right? So she went back down. And
did you ever see her after?
Interestingly enough, when I came back from the summit,
She was hammered at the bar.
fully and alive. No, she was very mean to me.
Oh yeah. Congratulations.
No, she was very bitter. She was.
I'm saying, like, good for you.
Yeah.
You've been training for 7 weeks and now you went to the top. Well, okay, so a couple things about that. I feel like sometimes too, that we do have these mechanisms, and I think some of them are hormonal and the way our brains work. I think there is such a heavy self-preservation mechanism in women more than men because of this idea of the potential to at least have children and care for them. And so unless we do other things sometimes to counterbalance some of those instincts, like, oh yeah, no, this is very uncomfortable and unsafe.
But she was in her late 50s, almost 60s. Do you think that continues?
I don't mean that. I think that we have natural inclinations which serve us biologically, that unless we find other environments to touch the other curtains that are more, they're not predicated upon us taking care of or staying alive. They're us facing a discomfort other than, let's say, childbirth, which is arguably, one of the more uncomfortable things people could do. I mean, not that having your period every single month is a big, party, but it's different, right? It's not that kind of pain. So unless that this woman in her 50s had prior experience in really genuinely going, I don't want to, I don't feel like it, I'm scared, it's hard, I'm even, maybe I'm risking my safety, I think it gets really hard to just, so even though she was there 20 times, it was still in the envelope way away from that moment. It's funny, yesterday I was on this is like a confession, I guess. I was on this bike in the sauna with Laird. And, normally we do it anywhere from 160 degrees to 190. And I'm a little taller than Laird, so also my head's higher. So I always say like, it's a little bit hotter. But yesterday, for whatever reason, it hadn't turned down and it was like 210, 220. And I remember going and instantly succumbing to that other tendency in my personality. It was Sunday, I've had a long week, this is supposed to be recovery day, and now all of a sudden it's 2:20 and I'm on this fucking bike. And he did 17 minutes in the first round. There'll be more rounds, but the first round was 17. And I'm like, I could see my chatter in my brain. Oh, my skin's burning over here, and this is hot, and look, the handles are hot, and why am I here? And I can't breathe and it's burning. And literally the entire 12 minutes that I was able to do it, I muscled through that. So I know where she lives within me. I've seen her, she pops up. But I do think it's something that unless we're encouraged to find it safely, she was experiencing one of those times for one of the first times in a life and death situation. So it would have been interesting if somehow her training, the way she grew up, other things could have pressed on her so that she could have experienced that side of herself and had the chance to go, I'm okay. I'll be okay. Just keep going. Just one pedal. Don't worry about the minutes ahead or the steps ahead. Just the next 10 seconds, the next 10 steps, whatever it is. So, maybe you've had that opportunity with not only you personally being in jiu-jitsu, but the conversations continuously in your sport, in your family. It's constant that you can make it out the other side.
You know what I find interesting? I think that women fear success more than they fear failure. Because to fail, it was like, I think that
you don't get
sometimes
isolated. You don't stand apart.
Yeah.
When you succeed, you stand apart. And short of, hey, I'm going to get my kid from under a threat of a vehicle or something, the notion of standing apart can be threatening. Again, you're connecting, this is connected back to our biology. Is she safe? Who does she think she is, right? So we have this weird thing of be strong, stand on your own 2 feet, do this thing. But, not too much. I went through that my entire career as an athlete, which was, and I was on a team sport. I think if you're a fighter, individual sport, tennis athlete, individual sport, certain things, it's like, man, it's you, and you learn that early. When you're on a team sport, you're supposed to do your job. You're not supposed to stand out.
But you were standing out a lot individually too. You were the first woman to design.
Yeah, and that was a nightmare.
Yeah, so do you feel like you paid a high price for being successful?
I felt terrible inside. I felt, and I don't want to redirect this conversation around me, but yes, I felt guilty. I felt like I wanted to prove to everybody that I was a good person and that I was a part of the team. And that was my youth and the lessons. That's why you go through that. So, you meet a woman in her 30s all of a sudden and she's ramped on responsibilities and she's like not really trying to please everybody quite as much as she used to. Plus you're not in those environments. Like school is kind of a trapped environment. Sports, you're trapped, you're on this team. Where when you go on your life, you sort of pick and choose then who you want to be around and who you're gonna, but you might be in an office with a certain group that you're kind of trapped. So I think I see women in their 30s kind of go, wait a second. And they learn how to separate and say, I'm going to speak my truth or I'm going to do my job. And if someone's unhappy, that's okay. I talked to a woman the other day, a very successful woman named Constance. And Constance, we're talking about being in our 50s, which, you're far away from. And she goes, oh yeah, I call it the fuck you 50s. because now you realize, first of all, man, time is short. Not even like time in the day. Like when you have little kids, you're like, bro, all right, there's no time. Now you're like, no, I'm going to die. I cannot be pleasing everybody anymore. Like all these things I thought, well, I'll practice this so that when I'm this age, I'll do this. This is the age. Now's the time. Like if you're going to do it, here we go, right? So the point is of this woman up the mountain now is, that's why it's important if you have a kid around you, a little girl, she doesn't have like brothers or, male cousins. It's like, man, if you can learn early, like, I'm going to be okay. Because she was mean to you because can you imagine? I've been there where I gave up just a little too soon on something. That kills you 100 times more than the suffering it took to either do it or the shit you got when you did. Who cares? Like you went in there and you saw her and she was mean to you. Do you care? No. Does she still think about that she didn't do the last 900 feet or whatever it was? I don't know. 300 meters. It's like, man, that's there.
Yeah. I think it's really hard for us to forgive ourselves when we get that close to something and we know that we chose to turn around for a lot of times unconscious reasons. We don't even realize what we're doing. But the thing with self-sabotage, if the women that are listening right now are like, yeah, I sabotage myself all the time, because we all do to a certain degree, if we're being very honest. We sabotage ourselves in like little ways constantly. The main thing that I saw in her that made me feel, oh, if only I had met her sooner is because I work with so many women And I see this direct correlation between self-esteem and self-sabotage. So the lower your self-esteem, the more you sabotage yourself. So for all the women who are listening, it's like, okay, well, how do I not sabotage myself? Because we all do it. Well, how can you do it less and less and less until you get to the point where you don't do it, especially in the things that, you know, are really important for you, which is what you did. Like, you became really successful, even though you paid the price, you still made it because you had high self-esteem, you know, and it has nothing to do with how you look, with the upbringing you had, if you had, you know, everything at home, or if you suffered abuse and neglect. It had nothing to do with your story, but how you respond to your story and the story that you tell yourself. So the way to stop self-sabotaging is to do little things every day that boost your self-esteem. Because when you think highly of yourself, then suddenly you start thinking, I am deserving. And when you think that you are deserving, you just move forward. And then sabotaging yourself is not an option anymore. It's not a question. But it's in the small things. Just how in the mountains, the small things are the big things. You lose one glove on your summit push, you are dead. It's not like you're gonna lose your hand. If you get stuck in a line, you lose your glove, you run out of, like, there's so many things that can happen with like tiny little details. You take one misstep, you forget to attach your safety before you switch your rope. It's like, oh, you're dead, you know? So because we are in this day-to-day life here in society that is so comfortable because we built a certain structure for us to live, we don't see the stakes of those small actions as high as when you are in an extreme environment. But the stakes are the highest when we are here in comfort, because that's what's going to determine if, when you get to the thing that matters the most to you, if you're going to sabotage yourself or if you build enough self-esteem to get there. And the difference between self-esteem and self-confidence is your ability to accomplish tasks. You can study your whole life and go like, I mastered this subject. I am fully confident I can deliver. But if you don't think highly of yourself, when you finally get the opportunity you've always dreamed of, suddenly you'll be like, oh, somebody else should take that role. I'll be like just one below. You're confident you can deliver, but you don't have the self-esteem to actually be on top. And that goes back to our conversation about posture. It's like, even if you force yourself out and you get into that posture, suddenly you start boosting your self-esteem. It's in the little things. It's like, I'm gonna do this for myself. You know, so many times we dress down, or we don't wanna look too good, or we don't wanna get too much attention. Let me not wear the collars that I love to wear, you know, let me not be that colorful, you know. Buy those red leather pants and put them on and go have some fun, you know? It's like, it's in the little details, it's in the leather pants, it's in, you know, the looking in the mirror and telling yourself, you know, that you're beautiful. Hi, baby, let's go. It's like, it's having fun with yourself, because those things matter.
And it's interesting because you said it's not really where we're from. Somebody told me this once, and I remember I was quite young when I heard this, and it really dawned on me. And they were talking about in the Bible, there's a verse that, and this is not about being religious, this is just something that I think is really poignant. God knows every hair on your head, but that means for everybody. That means the homeless person sitting at the light, that you're in your car and they're there. Well, God, meaning, you know, let's say love and something greater than all of us, however people want to label it. You matter so much that every hair on your head is counted for, no matter who you are. And I always thought that, yes, you have to do the work because you have to do that for yourself, because that's how you develop the skills. That's how you get tempered. That's just part of the 3D experience. But that ultimately, it's this level of grace that we're all there, and that the woman who didn't make it, it's like, yes, and every hair on her head is accounted for, because that's how important she is. And when I understood that, I sort of thought, okay, I'm not more special than anyone, but I am special. And I don't necessarily deserve anything, but I could work really hard. And so when I received grace, I could accept it.
And I'll say, you give away grace more than you receive. I'll tell a story on how your self-esteem and your grace impacted me. Before this whole Mount Everest, climb actually happened, I was put in a position that was very difficult for me to face, which was once I decided to climb Mount Everest, the price of my expedition changed drastically, right? So suddenly now, not only the choice of putting my life in line is important, but also putting my livelihood in line is also in check. So that just adds that much more load, right? And that was the one moment that I freaked out a little bit with the decision that I had to make, because 4 weeks into my training camp, deciding to climb Mount Everest, now, come back, I have a week and a half to come up with the sum to climb Everest. And that is not enough time to reach out to companies, to try and find sponsorships, to build out a story, to get budgets approved. There's a process for all of that. And I called you. And I was like, Gabby, I did everything I could. I trained so hard. I hired people. I trained people. I was teaching. I prepared the methodology for the whole time. Like, I literally put every second in my day counted towards this. I did everything I could. Am I not going to go just because of money? I'm not being able to raise money that fast. Like, I'm not getting answers fast enough. But, I need to submit the payment for the expedition tomorrow. Like, it's not, what do I do? And I'm so glad I called you, and I'll never forget, because you said, Cess, if you don't bet on yourself, nobody else will. And I got super emotional with that story because it changed the course of my life, and it's true. I was asking people to bet on me for this expedition when I wasn't fully betting on myself. And it's almost like a God-given situation that it seems to have made things so much harder for me, but it actually made it easier because it really tested my desire, my will to actually do this. And how much does that mean to you? And how much do you believe you can do it? And having a woman like you in my life who shared grace with me and who reminded me to believe in myself is, what allows me to be here telling a different story. I would be a different woman sitting here today if it wasn't for you in that particular moment. And I think as women, if we can show up for others in moments that we can see that all they need is a little push, we can change the story of so many people. And I've seen with my own eyes you changing the story of countless people. And I'm just so grateful I was one of them.
Well, Seth, you're a force to be reckoned with. You don't need much. You just need a little. You just need someone to hold this empty space for you to work it all out. You have it dialed already. I think listen. If I didn't learn one thing from great coaches, it was always caring first about the individual person more than anything else. The athlete or the endeavor or whatever that is, that's secondary. It's always, and it's. My coach from college, who I'm still very close to, not only showing me, hey, I'm going to be here for you, the person, and then we'll deal with the expectations from the athlete, but also we're going to, I'm going to expect the highest principles from you, but I'm going to expect them from myself also. And I think if you do that in life, it's not only is it really rewarding, but if one kind word or one conversation, thoughtful conversation you can have with a person is supportive, like so many people have done for me and continue to do for me, I don't think there's many things in life that are more satisfying than that. So you get to the top. How long do you hang out? What's it like?
Oh my gosh. It's the most beautiful view you'll ever see.
What are the last 3 steps like? And is he in front of you or behind you? How does it work?
Well, the tricky thing is there's a lot of false summits that we call when you're climbing Everest, where you literally think you reach the summit and it's like, oh no, this is the South Summit. And I'm like, where's the real summit? No, you gotta cross, this massive rock, and then you get there and it's like, oh, actually it's not here yet. You have another hour. So, we get to the South Summit and you have that feeling and then you keep going. But it's, even a reminder that it's about the journey, So ultimately we get to the top. Just to give out context, the climb to the top for me from Camp 4 took about like 10 and a half hours. And I get there and it's somehow a gift that keeps on giving because the summit is empty. And I'm by myself with my Sherpa for 40 minutes on the summit, which goes by like the blink of an eye. And you're looking around and you're seeing the curvature of the earth. And you're at the highest point ever. There's nowhere higher, And at the same time, it's weird because there's no relaxation. Everything in your body is like, hey, the climb is about to begin because you're about to descend. And, all those cliffs that you kept looking up, now you're going to have to look down. And, I have never been so tired in my life. I was exhausted, And you are seeing people who are giving up. And you are seeing people who just died. You're seeing, fresh bodies in the mountain. You're seeing bodies that have been there for decades. The summit day that I had was part of the deadliest season on Mount Everest history. So it was, a mix of really positive energy and a certain heaviness in the air, because, Chomolungma, which is Mother Goddess of the world, is the mountain, reminds you of her power constantly. And I think it's so beautiful that it's a feminine mountain, that is the highest mountain in the world, is how the Nepalese call it, Chomolungma, which means the Mother Goddess of the world. And it's the highest peak on planet Earth. And I do, think that the whole time I was being given permission to be there. I felt that spiritually constantly. And every day before my climb, I asked for permission to continue climbing and to be on those grounds. And I could feel a portal opening and I could feel I was protected the whole time. It was so interesting. I went through so many situations that I was like this close to dying and I still felt protected somehow, and if I had felt the calling, like you are not welcome here, we don't want anybody here, I would have turned around,
See, I think that's the important thing is everything has a timing and a season. And there's times when we're like, yeah, I shouldn't be here right now. And that's part going back to the listening to that voice. It's funny when you talk about, people not making it, even worse, people passing, is in real time, that duality of like, you've just accomplished something and that probably unbelievable sense of just elation and joy and a sense of accomplishment in the exact proximity of, treachery and loss. And I think that those extreme environments have that duality so ever present.
Yeah, it's like the greatest day of your life is someone else's last day on this planet, And the descent is a reminder that for every peak, there is a way down, and mentally, emotionally, and physically. Like your emotions also, you reach that peak and just know you're going to have to ride that wave down. And usually the way down is the most dangerous part, Literally in the mountain, the descent is the most dangerous part, which is, when most people actually suffer a fatality. I think because of your conditions, you've pushed so hard to get to where you are that a lot of times there's nothing left. People have organ failure, people fall, there's, people make mistakes, it's all kind of stuff. But in life too, like when you are riding that wave down, it is part of life. Nobody stays in the peak forever. Peaks are not meant for us to be there forever, And it's a natural thing of life. Some people are climbing up, some people just got to the top, some people are descending. What's next for you, and just like seeing that the view from the way up is completely different than from the way down. And it's equally beautiful, but you do get to see a different side of the mountain. You do get to have a completely different perspective when you're going down. Now suddenly like your view has reversed and there's so many lessons from that descent. And it's equally as hard. And usually the descent is a little bit faster. So don't be discouraged. It takes a lot longer to get to the top. And a lot of times on the descent, things also happen that you don't expect. And it pushes you a little bit up and then you have to descend again. And it's just really part of the journey. When I was training for Everest, my coach really inflicted that in my mind, like, know when you get to the top, that is only half of the climb. So even assess with yourself as you're going up, is this sustainable? Can I keep going? Do I have enough energy to then go all the way back down, And when you get to the top, you kind of know that that's temporary, so at least enjoy it. I feel like when we get to the top, then now it's like, oh my gosh, hold your horns, do everything you can. Like, we try to hold on to something that it's gonna pass anyways, and I feel like I was able to do that. Me and my Sherpa had fun. We made a bunch of videos, and we were looking around and made a prayer, and I really took it in. I was very present when I was on the summit, and the sensation of being there is very vivid in me. And I think it's because I allowed myself to enjoy it and to take that in, and I knew it was temporary, so I really wanted to take as much of that feeling as possible. And it's the journey continues. We're here now, and
so you come home, and it takes a bit of, not long, but a little bit of time to recover. You were very thin and beat up.
Yeah.
And you have been single for the years, a few years prior to that, and during that trip, which is sort of something interesting. Well, it is, because I think you have an interesting mix for me as somebody who, and again, you're formidable. You're very, how tall are you? Close to 6 feet, 6 feet, right? You're skilled at knowing how to subdue people, the gentle art,
of folding people while they're in the
please stop. And as great fortune and timing as it would, you meet somebody, and I'm curious. Was there something that maybe opened up in you that allowed for someone to come into your life, or do you think it was timing? Like, what do you think has changed? Because as long as I've known you, if you wanted to meet somebody, you would have. That's true.
Yeah.
You just didn't, and maybe that wasn't the timing, or you didn't really want to. What do you think has changed in you? And not only that, but to call a partner into your life that really, I think, reflects a lot of things that you need. That are good for your personality.
It's so interesting because, if somebody asked me like, oh, if you could have done anything differently about this expedition, what would it be? I think it would have been to prepare myself for what was to come post-climb. That was harder than anything I've ever been through.
The come down. Right?
It was insane. The hardest thing I've ever did was to recover from Everest, not climb it. And for multiple reasons, I was physiologically depleted. You become, a bag of hormones. Your hormones change drastically when you're in the mountain. We as women, at least I did, I got my period every 2 weeks, which is not fun when you don't even have a bathroom in the mountain. And I lost a lot of weight. But most importantly, the amount of stress that you deal with from almost dying at every moment, because things can change at any second. Yeah.
Plus your body knows. It's not even about your emotionality. It's your body being in those conditions going, what is this?
Yeah. Your body knows we're not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
And, you're under stress. You don't sleep deeply because there are noises that could be an avalanche at any time. And so your nervous system is completely out of whack. And it's so hard to come back and go back to normal, because your normal has changed. You will never go back to normal. And I think there's a big hormonal aspect where it's like you have a big dip that it's like almost like a depression. And also, when you pretty much achieve like the hardest thing that you could ever think of,
it's a come down for sure.
It's it's almost like a death of a lot of things, and it's almost like nothing will ever top that. So what else am I going to do in my life, you know? But at the same time, I think I came in knowing that I needed a lot of healing, you know? And that was energetically, I think, what opened me up to be in a relationship, you know? I met my boyfriend a month after I was back, you know? So
She has her guard down, everybody.
yeah, I did. I needed a lot of healing. And I knew if I found it coming from the right place, I think I was ready to welcome it, you know, in a way that was at the perfect timing.
I think it's hard to meet people now, especially with digital. You know, it's like when you meet people and they say they met somewhere, and I'm like, in the wild?
Yeah.
You know, like you met in the wild?
Yeah.
So I always encourage people, you're another great example of when it's the right time and you're ready, that there's someone there. And that even when it's challenging, because I mean, you know, you had your own challenges of finding a person that you could dance around with. And so I don't know, it inspires me when I see people finding love. It's really positive. And also when 1 and 1 can equal 3 and beyond. It's a great thing when you have a partnership and somebody who wants to amplify your hopes and dreams, and you feel the same way about them, and they want you to be who you are. And so I'm really that part. I mean, if it took, you know, you climbing Mount Everest, good for you. I want to round out this conversation, and it's a little more superficial, but I do think it sort of touches a lot of people. Is so you really kind of doubled down on supporting women in having the techniques to be aware, because that's really a way to avoid, I don't know, how much, 95% of things, just being in awareness to remove yourself out of a situation. But if for some reason they find themselves a target of someone, all these myriad of ways that they can get out of it. So we were talking earlier that you really have an entrepreneur's heart. So you've been teaching, you've had your school, now you're kind of redirecting, you're doing public speaking and some other things. And literally in the last 6 months, you took your followers from which number to which number?
From like 42,000
Yeah.
to like 540,000. Yeah.
So for people listening, because this is, and I don't mean this for people listening from a vanity point of view, this is connected to your business and part of what you're doing. How did you do that? Because I think a lot of people who are wanting to use technology as part of their business feel like, I'm not in the algorithm, I can't get there, do I have to buy people, do I have to spend a ton of money to do these heavy duty videos? What happened?
Yeah, it's so interesting because it still blows my mind as well, right? Like in 6 months, that it changes everything.
Well,
It builds a business,
And
right?
you didn't go online a year before that. How long have you had?
Yeah.
Let's use Instagram. How long have you had your Instagram account?
Like at least like 10, 15,
Okay.
like long,
Let's
over
say,
a decade.
Right. So you've
Yeah.
had it all that time.
Yeah,
And you had a large following. That's a large following.
yeah,
For a person, that is a large following. And then in 6 months, you 10x'd it beyond.
yeah.
So what happened? Was this a conscious move?
Yeah, I think that if we see everything that we do with the same lens of like, okay, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to give my all to this endeavor, in the end, it turns out as a constructive experience for you. So for me, it was like, okay, I need to take part in this digital business, which the biggest challenge for me was to overcome, the fear of not being liked, because you're putting yourself out there. And my only motivation was to share and teach what I already do in my gym.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it took me so long to do that. I had people asking me for like a couple years, like, please share your lessons. Can you post this? Even my students were like, I'd love to go and watch this later. And you're always, telling us all these inspiring things. Why do I have to go personally to one of your talks in order to like learn from you. And so when I decided to do that, whether it is social media, whether it is climbing Mount Everest, whether it is, doing jiu-jitsu, if you bring in the same mindset, you will see results. So it's not like, you have to a strive of luck. There's no luck in anything. Luck is a component that comes when you've done the groundwork, you've built the foundation, you are consistent enough, you are open to criticism, you have a team surrounding you. So all these things are really important. And I just transferred the model that I already had for everything else into the social media world, which we have to face it. I think, like you said, a lot of people talk about superficially, like it's just numbers. Mm-hmm. To me, it was never just numbers. And I think that's why, I have such a good relationship with my followers, is because I see those 550,000 people as like individuals. Mm-hmm. And I interact with them and they have transformed me. I never did it for the numbers, but I think that was a reward from the effort that I was putting in. So everything leads to effort. Just to give like an overall
when you say transformed you, the way you look at things, the way you communicate, like in what ways?
It transformed my understanding of how much impact I can have in the world. Mm. I was always, a person who had the belief that unless I was face to face, it didn't matter. It wasn't as meaningful. It wasn't as impactful. It was superficial. It wouldn't last. I don't know. I grew up thriving in in-person interactions. And for me, the digital world, was just like superficial, fast, moving, nothing lasts. And now I see that, through very individual stories on how much following my content, how much a single lesson has saved them from a situation. And I'm like, wait a second. I actually helped save the life of a woman in India that told me I was approaching my car and I did what you said that I should do, which this guy was following me and I turned and faced him and I was so nervous and I was shaking. But as you always teach, I engaged first. And I said, excuse me, do you need anything? And the guy was kind of weird. And I used my voice and I said, do not come near me. And, I'm safe because of you. And I knew he was ill-intended and just all these stories. And now I truly believe that I can impact so many more people. Therefore, I'm impacted by them, and I'm motivated by them. So I do think that we as creators or whatever it is that you do, the truth is, if you don't have an online presence, it doesn't matter how much of an expert you are, somebody else who knows way less than you is going to have more impact. And I'll tell you this was a hard truth for me to digest in the process of deciding if I was, going to share all the things that, I study and that I teach on social media. And I realized that yes, because somebody else will do that. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to, honor your truth, because if you're trying to please everyone, you're not going to get anywhere. Then you're going to keep your number of followers. Yeah. But the more niche, the more direct you are to what truly matters to you, those people will find you. And I think it's important for whoever is investing in that to understand a lot of times, the first push is the biggest drag, because what it took me to go from 42,000 to 100,000 was 4 months. Yeah. And in 20 days, I went from 100,000 to 300,000.
I remember that.
And, it was just
because then the exponential.
Yeah. And it picks up, because when it comes to the algorithm learning from you, which is such a trip to think about that, it's actually they are learning about your behavior. Yeah. And the more clear your behavior is, and the more clear what your message is, the easier it is for the algorithm to help you. Yeah. So I think if we shift our mindset from thinking the algorithm sucks, the algorithm is against me, these platforms are terrible, and you start thinking, you know what? It goes back to our conversation on let's take ownership. What if I think that the algorithm wants to help me, but it doesn't know how? What am I doing that is making it difficult for the algorithm to actually help me? Am I confusing the algorithm? Mm-hmm. Am I posting a different thing each day? And when you dive deep into this reflection, you're going to see that what the algorithm is seeing is exactly who you are. And it's your behavioral patterns. And then replicate that into your life. And you're going to see, this is literally how I show up in my life. If each day you post about a different thing, it's just reflecting that each day you're interested in a different subject. So then if this is who you are, then you have to embrace that.
Are you talking about me?
No, you fully embrace that. But
I get yelled at all the time.
You do.
Pick a lane. Oh yeah, because I'm interested in food and relationships and science and microbiome and parenting and sex and aging. And it has been, so that's why I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm not picking a lane.
Yeah.
I'm not.
I think it depends also what is your purpose,
What's
right?
your goal? Yeah.
Like for me, my goal is to amplify my message.
No, I think it's
You know?
genius. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I'm not only so excited for you, I think a lot of people sort of have something that they really would like to do, and they can. You know, I'm probably approaching it differently.
But would you think that, you know, what I said about social media actually reflects our behavioral patterns is fitting? Because like I actually have the tendency of being obsessive, of like, when I choose a direction, I'm like, I'm gonna go all in this thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna do mountaineering. Yeah, why don't I climb Mount Everest? Like, what? Like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go all in. And I have this feeling of like, I want to learn everything about this, and it's how I operate.
Yeah.
And the beauty in, you know, having this space, which is social media, where people can show up as who they are. You are like your whole life. You were at the same time a super successful model and an incredibly accomplished athlete and an entrepreneur, like building brands and all. So you have this curiosity and you're showing up as who you are, right? So I think that the issue is
And
people...
it is slow rolling, baby. It's like, I'm like, holy shit. You know, if it was up to the people who I work with, they'd want me to take the ownership of like longevity and superwoman, old lady aging. And I'm just not willing to do it because it interests me on the scale a lot less than being a human being. And that's the other part of the conversation is I'm okay with that too, because I'm trying to show up really in the way that is me, which is, it's just different, and we're good, and we're friends. So I think that's the great thing is we all have ways to do it.
Yeah, and we're both okay with it, right? I think the frustration comes from the conflicting information between what people want us to do and what we end up doing. So, you know, the truth is focus on who you are, what you want to learn, and what you have to offer.
Yeah.
But then you have to do that thing.
Yes.
Right? Like you have a podcast, you have multiple guests, you have a multifaceted life, and you have all of these things to offer, and you're offering them, which is beautiful and it's rare because trends come and go, life changes. And if you're writing your truth, it's like, it's what people call luck, right? Like suddenly this, like the timing, you're the perfect person at the perfect time, but that's going to shift. Somebody else is going to be in the right place at the right time, you know, and you just have to build the thing that makes sense to you so that, you know, you have no regrets and no internal conflicts.
And I think that's right. And I'm quietly very interesting. Quietly.
You're so funny. I wish people knew how funny Gabby is. I always say that. And, you know, in your intimacy, maybe they are PG-13 or whatever people would call it, but you are hilarious. Your sense of humor, your speed from what you see and what you say is just incredible, which is why you're such, you know, a wonderful interviewer.
I want to thank you for coming here because I have been obviously I'm a big fan of yours as a not only as a teacher, as a person, as a woman, and as a friend. But when you took on Everest, I remember thinking, I'm going to make sure that I don't ever sound like, oh, sure. And just be like, yeah, okay. But inside I was like, holy shit, like that is a serious undertaking. And this is in a really short period of time. And so I really applaud you. And I applaud the moment that you decided at the hardest time to say, the plan right now in place, even though I'm not hugely versed on this whole situation, it's not right for me. And I'm tired and I'm out here by myself and I'm still not gonna follow this. I think that I really thought about it when you shared that story with me, and I thought, I don't know if I would have been able to do it. I wonder if I would have just gone along with the program. And so I really applaud you for so many reasons, but just reminding people that it is okay to say, I'm not comfortable with this. This doesn't feel right. I don't know a ton about this. This doesn't feel right. And I think your message, you lived it, and you're always encouraging people to do that. So before we go, 2 things. One, remind people, and I know you speak a lot to women, but people, kind of the first 3 things that feel important, could be 5, for keeping yourself safe.
Yes. Your posture, number 1.
Posture of the champion, which is
Your eyes, looking at people in the eye when you communicate with them, and your voice. Making sure that you're coming with a confident, assertive, direct voice. Which are the 3 things that as women and people, when we are scared or vulnerable, these are the first 3 things that go out the window. We make ourselves small, we start kind of looking down or looking up at people, and our voice becomes very quiet or very high-pitched,
screeching,
or almost whispering. Oh, hi, okay, I want to go. No. Do not let your posture down. Look at people in the eye, which is not like from up above, it's not arrogance.
Mm-mm.
You're not smaller or bigger than anyone. You're leveled with everyone, and communicate yourself clearly. Because think about it, when we're nervous, our voice starts trembling. Our body collapses, and we have a hard time holding eye contact, especially in moments of disagreement, of conflict, of vulnerability, of uncertainty. Then suddenly it's hard to lock in eyes. So what does that do? It brings your awareness to yourself, because how you show up will always determine how the world shows up for you. So we are not able to control people. We are not able to dictate their behavior. We will never know if we're going to cross paths with someone who's having a bad day. But what we can always control is how we show up and how we respond. And those things are in the everyday, practicing in your conversations, and start noticing, the posture of the champion. Like, tie that line on your heart, and before you leave home, arms up, and then when you let go, you're leading with your heart. And just keep reminding yourself that, because if you have those 3 tools, everything else becomes a consequence. Because when you have good posture, when you make eye contact, when you express yourself clearly, you suddenly now are more aware.
Yeah.
You increase your level of awareness, because awareness of your surroundings becomes with your awareness of yourself. And that is what will eventually prevent 99% from situations from happening.
And that's the thing that I want to highlight, because I've heard all the people in this space, I've heard Hoy say it's don't get in that situation if you can help it. And so all of these things are actually precursors to help you avoid conflict. And yes, you teach people, hey, if somebody does this or that, there's a move to that. But ultimately, really what you're reinforcing and sharing with people is, hey, let's help you avoid those situations. And I do want to remind people, as somebody who has 3 daughters, that our telephones have made it harder for young people to look at people in the eye. It's just harder. It's a scarier world for whatever reason, that they're more on the device. And also, to look at the device, you do drop your head, which does put you in fight or flight.
Yeah.
Automatically, physiologically. So if you could either practice it yourself, and especially for your young children, get them to order their own stuff. If you go out, ask for it, tell them, to look at the person in the eye, speak up, stand up. So these are the practices, because already I grew up without a phone. And we were, it was like benign neglect. Your parents were like, what? You get it yourself, right? So we had a lot of that incorporated in our day-to-day lives. These young kids, they're almost thrown more to disadvantage because of the telephone. So I just want to remind people, gently get them to practice this because it will be an incredibly useful tool.
Yeah, and if they're confused about how can I do that as parents and not sound like cheesy or not have them roll their eyes on me or not have them walk out and slam the door in my face, use these examples and these reminders in your everyday routine. So if you tell your daughter, go order your own, drink or food or whatever, and you notice that they have bad posture, criticizing them about it, it's not gonna help, right? If they say like, oh, look at your back always hunched, like, stand up, taller, they're gonna resist you.
Yeah.
But if you come from this perspective, and feel free to use the tools that we're sharing here, tell them like, hey, have you noticed a champion on the podium, how they look so proud to be there? That makes a difference in life too. Like, we shouldn't stand tall just when we're on the podium, like, go there as a champion, go there, posture of a champion, and even if on the first time when you say it, it looks like they didn't listen and they're kind of like resisting a little bit, it starts getting into their heads. And when you're not there and they're with their group of friends, and then, now they're looking at the dynamics and the personalities all around, and then maybe somebody's picking on them or giving them adjectives or nicknames or talking about, their nose or whatever, making them uncomfortable, they will go, oh yeah, posture of the champion. You know what?
Yeah.
And they will start using that, even if you think they're not learning. At home, you just handed them, a plate of food for lunch or dinner. Usually kids grab it like, oh, thank you. No. Look at me in the eye when you say thank you. Like, make sure you create that 1 second moment where it's like, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we leave. And it's just reminders like, hey, eye contact when we acknowledge people. It's just, and with practice, it starts becoming second nature.
It does. And get them early, because then by the time they're preteens and teens, this is the only thing I'll say. They'll imitate you. So you got to be about yourself. And that even means in conflict with them, that you can lovingly and directly look at them in the eyeball, right? Instead of like, you're hysterical and you're yelling everywhere. I think these are things that are important to model for them, which is, I've thought this often in coaching. If I raise my voice where I'm pitchy, right, screechy, and not direct, like even looking at the people I'm working with, you don't seem in charge. And so teaching your kids to lower the tone of their voice, to look in the eye. If you're really pissed off, but you're not flipping out, I fail at that one all the time, everyone. I will yell at my youngest. I'm not a big yeller, but it's just reminding too, when they're young, the words work better. As they get older, man, you better be it yourself. You got to model it, or take them someplace that they can also have that influence.
And I'm around you enough to also say that even if you yell once in a blue moon, what you do 90% of the times is what really matter, right? Yeah. So you are modeling a behavior that is highly led by example, and she's observing you. It's okay.
Only one of the three is observing. We all are 33% chance of success rate.
We all are observing. We are all observing each other all the time.
All the time. It's a great thing. Well, Cess, I continue to learn from you, and congratulations on everything. And I'm really excited for this next chapter. So many, your personal and your professional chapters ahead of you, because I think you're hitting a really interesting stride. So congratulations. And please remind people all of the places that they can find you.
Yes. Thanks for having me here. My second time. I feel like a veteran on this podcast. Always a pleasure. Time always flies by. Oh, such a joy. So yes, lots of exciting things this year. 2 places that are ideal for people to find me. My Instagram for content, where they can learn on a daily basis pretty much, is Cesalina Gracie. CESAGRACIE. And they can go on my website, Cesalina.com, and sign up for my newsletter. that's the best way for them to get updates on my courses, on the workshops I'm teaching. I have an upcoming one in LA, I have an upcoming one in New York, and whatever I have as last minute offerings will be there. In-depth tips, everything that sometimes it's hard to share on a short format video on Instagram is on there. So Instagram and my newsletter are the best places to
Do
stay
you
in
do
touch.
your newsletter every week or every month?
I'm
Or just on
actually
eBay?
starting in February. So
Oh, I can't wait till you get into newsletters. Hell, okay. You're just so happy that there's AI, because newsletters, it's like, oh wait, what? It's Sunday night already? I think it's great. Well, Cess, love you.
Love you more.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone for spending some time with me. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you did, feel free to share it with your friends, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, I want to hear from you. Tell me what's working, what's resonating with you, and how you're getting it done. Keep going.